Hello everyone. It seems like Israel is taking on enemies on all sides, even in the seas, and we're going to break down just who are these enemies and why are they attacking Israel. So first of all, let's take a look at the Gaza Strip here. So first things first is just taking a look at the changes that we've seen, and one of the biggest changes, of course, is in the Jabalia area of Israeli forces. We can see seemingly pushing further from Beit Hanun out here, and from what we can see, as well as probably from what you heard, is the uh, hospital out here, the Indonesia hospital, seemingly being besieged by Israeli forces. From what we understand, taking into account what happened at the Al Shifa hospital, Hamas does not necessarily seem opposed to either stationing weapons or operating somewhat loosely out of these hospitals. From what I understand, just looking, especially taking Al Shifa into account, all from what I saw of the footage that had come out there was primarily that a lot of the militants and sort of the equipment that was seized from there were primarily, small arms and, not really things like people who were taken out of there, not like militants, just a lot of equipment that was taken out. So, in terms of this hospital here and how that differs, I'm assuming it might not be too different, but this is probably going to be the same in the same boat because we've taken a look at some of the footage actually coming out of this area previously, and a lot of the fighting has been like a lot of the bombings, of course, have been relatively um, within view of this hospital, and a lot of the footage being recorded from this hospital of some pretty crazy bombings going on out here, not just in the north, but mostly in the Jabalia area, as we've seen like a lot of Israeli airstrikes and just kind of demolition going on out there. And also, we can see that Israeli forces have further pushed south out here, trying to what seems to be consolidate their line of control out here, perhaps trying to keep out any Hamas militants from the south and just trying to keep a bit of a border and a zone where it would be harder for them to fully cross if they did want to continue the fight in northern Gaza. And looking over here towards West Bank, we can see that some arrests were made, and just further unrest is just happening out here. And I'm of course expecting more clashes to further escalate out here in the West Bank. And something that surprised me is that today it seems that there have been a bit of an uptick in hostilities with Hezbollah. As I expected previously, as I said in my last video, I thought that there wouldn't really be much more hostilities, but there is some footage of more intense fighting coming out here. And as we can see, this is a lot of shelling and airstrikes by Israeli forces out here, and even a bit more by Hezbollah. So just in general, just talking about this, this is so volatile. This entire conflict is so subject to change, and things can change on a dime. So yeah, other than that, let's take a look at some footage. So the first clip here coming out of Gaza that I wanted to show is what appears to be some demolition done by Israeli forces. And if we just take a look at this, the complete density of Gaza out here, and just taking a look at seemingly what probably was a city block or something equivalent out here, which has been completely leveled to dirt and is, further being leveled even more. Um, so it's somewhat in line of a lot of the footage that comes out of out here, which is a lot of just airstrikes and buildings being leveled, and it just makes me wonder how much infrastructure needs to be destroyed for this war to end. Um, and that's not a jab towards Israel. It's more so a statement towards both sides. Like, how many houses are Hamas going to let be destroyed until until I suppose they lay down their arms, right? I mean, just talking about this whole conflict. I mean, it depends. It really depends on Israel. The ball is in Israel's court, and if they want to destroy Hamas once and for all, they seemingly have the capabilities to do it. And those capabilities would be to completely level the entire Gaza Strip, right? I mean, from what it seems that Hamas are going to keep fighting until every last building is complete rubble, right? So just talking about that, this whole situation here, it's definitely really complicated, and so much of Gaza has been destroyed already, and so much more is going to be destroyed. But let's look at our other clip out here. All right, so looking at this clip, it's probably one you've already seen, but these are Houthi rebels in their helicopter seizing this ship out here, which they allege is Israeli and is run by Israel, but neither of the places of where it came from and to where it's going to are Israel, and from what I understand, it doesn't operate under an Israeli flag, and I don't think a single crew member is Israeli. So, how much of this story is true? I mean, from what I understand, perhaps the Houthis are just trying to seize a ship, and from what I understand as well, from what's been observed, this ship is really high, as in it's operating very high on the seas. So, which it means that it's empty in turn, that this ship is completely empty, and the Houthis are essentially seizing a ship that is not Israeli and that has nothing on it. So, as to why they would do this, the only thing I can think of is maybe they're trying to do some pirating out here, maybe, or maybe they had some wrong information and that, or maybe some misleading information and they thought this really was an Israeli ship, or maybe there is some ties to Israel in terms of this ship. I don't know, but from everything I've seen out here is that this ship, this crew, everything about this ship has absolutely no ties to Israel whatsoever. Um, of course, if that changes or if that develops, I'll let you know. But other than that, this clip is essentially it's very cinematic. It seems like something that you'd see out of a movie of this helicopter flying in, and I don't want to show the rest, albeit it's not very violent. But there are militants who come out of the helicopter, and there's a guy with a camera which is poking out of his back, which is coming out like around a foot or two, which gives a pretty wide angle, and you can see the helicopter flying away, and a pan around of the ship. So just the reason as to why this is perhaps it's a propaganda victory for the Houthis out here. Maybe they're just looking for something to try and show, I guess, solidarity with Gaza, as we can see here. Well, I guess we can't really see it that well, but yeah, we can see, the flag of Yemen and, of course, the flag of Palestine out here. So, that's all I really wanted to show and say about this clip. All right, so we got some even more movement out here by Russians in Ukraine. So first of all, looking at Novomykhailivka, we can see that Russian forces have moved about a kilometer, probably a bit more, probably a kilometer and a half, towards this town out here. And what I really wanted to say, just in terms of this, is that this is an area where we haven't really seen too much movement lately. This is, kind of near Volodar, as we talked about a little bit, and as I'm sure you've seen, the extensive Russian equipment losses that came out of there. But this is an area which we have, talked about a little bit, but for the most part, it's been pretty quiet, I guess, um, in terms of, not necessarily any movement. But other than that, update in the Stepova area, we can see that, of course, Krasnohorivka, and if we just take a look out here from yesterday and today, we can see that they're further pushing out of this area and trying to encircle Avdiivka, which, I mean, as if we just backtrack it a few days, we can see that they're pushing hard. They're pushing really hard. And I just can't. I don't see a future where they don't succeed in taking this city, because I mean, just looking at it here, it looks like they're going to succeed. It's going to take a while, obviously, since it's taken so long for them to even get to this point. But I see them taking this city eventually. How many losses is it going to take? Probably a lot. How much equipment? Also probably a lot. Um, but just talking about Avdiivka, um, uh, the Russians are probably going to, like I said before, like Bakhmut, fight really, really hard just to take this one city. Now, looking at some of the combat that's being reported out here, decent amount of shelling as usual, and what's really interesting is not just the 54 combat engagements, which is about in line of what we've seen, but the anti-air defense out here in the Kiev area, and as we've kind of touched on previously, is that Russians are probably going to try and target Ukrainian infrastructure once it starts getting cold and winter really sets in, to kind of put pressure on Ukrainian civilians in this war. So we are probably going to see a decent amount more attacks on Kiev, and from what I understand, a lot of attacks are increasing out here. Alright, so here's some destroyed equipment losses we can see out here. So first of all, Ukraine was at 4,718 and now they're at 4,725. Now talking about Russian losses out here, they were at 13,141 and now they're at 13,152. And I promised, as per my last Oryx report, as to why these numbers don't seem to be as consistent as they were. As we talked about, the reason why is because Oryx, of course, for the most part, has completely shut down, save for these updates. But the only thing that I could come up with is that one of the people who are updating this, from my understanding, is only actually two people, is that one of them is actually explicitly pro-EU and pro-NATO. So, of course, that inclines them to be anti-Russian. So when we look at these numbers that seem to favor Ukraine, not just, in terms of just uh, because I believe these numbers, for the most part, I believe that these numbers are more or less in line with what we've seen. But when we see Ukrainian losses seemingly not being updated as consistently as Russian losses, that's a bit concerning in terms of how truthful these losses are. Although I do think that this is probably in line with what the real losses are. I do think that they're probably 1 to 3 in favor of Ukraine. So, that's just talking about that. Of course, I'll keep an eye on these losses for the future. And if you don't really like these not the numbers themselves, but if you don't like the seemingly bias in these reports, just let me know, and I'll stop using it. I'll use a more I guess less biased uh, report. But yeah, that's out there for equipment losses. Let's look at some combat. Okay, so taking a look at this clip, I want to preface that uh, looking at combat footage is something that I'm not necessarily it doesn't make me happy to do it. Looking at this footage in particular, these clips, most clips are just pretty um, cut and dry for the most part. Most of everything that I look at is not particularly graphic, and this one isn't either. In fact, I don't think there's anything really actually graphic about this clip, because this is an FPV drone, a one-way drone, I suppose you could call it. And of course the footage cuts out before any damage is shown. But what I really wanted to talk about here is that this is a Ukrainian drone, and this is of course a Russian tank, and there are troops trying to shoot it down. And something that really struck me about this clip is that one of the Russian soldiers out here, um, he doesn't move, as in like he's just standing there and he's just watching this drone just like fly around, and it's not really until the last second when he tries to move. But this might be, I think, a reflection of Russian morale out here. Of course, a lot of the reports that are said anti-Russian are, you know, Russian morale all-time low, Ukrainian morale all-time high. But I mean, of course, there are people in warfare who, you know, I mean, it's war, right? It's just the nature of fighting. So, but it's just really struck me that this guy is just standing there, right, until pretty much the very last second when this drone goes off. But I've studied Russian culture. I've been to Russia. I've studied in Moscow, and I've seen a lot of clips too of just Russians sitting in their foxholes or in trenches and pretty much just waiting for a drone to take them. Like literally, that's exactly what they do. They just sit there and wait for either a drone or a drone drop or an FPV drone to just pretty much take them as they sit alone in their trenches. So it's this footage. This footage is tough. The footage is tough to watch sometimes, and which is why I don't like to show the actual footage itself or even really stills. I just want to show that this is actually footage out here. So, anyways, let's look at something else. Okay, so we got some footage out here coming out of the capital city, Khartoum, of Sudan, and what I really want to show here is that there are guys back here with machine gun firing out of this window of this pretty heavily damaged building. As we can see, it seems to be blown out. What I really want to talk about here is just a few things. Number one, a lot of the footage we see coming out here is, of course, of usually one guy. I'm not sure if he's the same guy, or maybe it's just a certain style of video recording that these guys will do, which is usually centered on them. They'll usually be focusing on whatever the action is, and then partway through, it'll be focusing on them, perhaps towards the end of the video. And maybe it'll focus on a couple other guys who are also looking towards the camera while some other guys are actually trying to engage in the fight, which also side note, these guys are, if you would believe it, Sudanese military. These are the military, of the army of Sudan. So take that as you will. But as we've talked about previously, you would think that the way these guys operate, I mean, this is literally a war zone out here, and this guy is on his phone. So you would think that these guys are irregular military, but they're not. Anyways, what also I wanted to talk about here is that the fighting that is going on out here is in the actual capital of Sudan, which means that this fighting is extensive. It's across a large swaths of Sudan, and it's not just between the RSF and Sudanese military. There are a couple tribes in Sudan. I believe a couple Arab tribes have been some clashes have further engaged between them, and there was an interesting clip of a large, I believe, a caravan of them, or just a large column of them on horseback, and also on foot. But it was just interesting to see these guys with small arms out there, guns and whatnot, and they're all riding on horses, and it was interesting to see. Of course, some were also following on foot, but um, like I said, it's just this conflict is so interesting to just observe for a wide variety of reasons. And even though it's interesting, like Gaza, like Ukraine, people are still being displaced and hurt in this conflict. So just in general, I this conflict may be entertaining to see, but don't try and downplay it as any lesser conflict just because there are guys out here who are very clearly not well trained, if trained at all, on their phones in the middle of battle. There are still people on the end of those guns, and who, what kind of people are they, right? Are they actually military, or are maybe stray bullets happen all the time? Anyways, sorry about that side tangent, but let's look at some other clips. Alright, for our last clip here before we wrap up, this is a junta soldier from Myanmar, and we can see he is hiding from, of course, anti-junta forces in the Kaya state. And what I really want to talk about here is that, of course, like in Ukraine, we hear a lot about morale, like Russian morale, Ukrainian morale, whatever. And of course, coming out of Myanmar, we hear the same thing, but from this footage, I'm thinking that what they say about, junta morale being at an all-time low, I think it's mostly true. I mean, this guy hasn't. I mean, sure, he hasn't taken off his helmet or seemingly his uniform. For the most part, he's just hiding. And of course, in warfare, either side, whatever, might be hiding and or trying to, when it comes down to it, maybe they just lose their nerve, whatever it may be, or their flight response, overtakes their fight, whatever it may be. But it's this clip seems indicative that morale is pretty low for Myanmar military. That does not necessarily mean that it's, of course, indicative of the whole. of the junta and junta forces, but a lot, of course, as we've seen, a lot of the footage seems to be in favor of anti-junta forces. And coming out of the Kaya state, we know that these are the KNDF, the Karenni forces. So they seem to be having a decent amount of gains in this area. So what will that amount to? I think what I really think is that um, they're going to keep progressing in terms of taking more area, taking more military outposts and whatnot. But what I don't know is that what will this amount to? What will this entire conflict turn into, so yeah, anyways, that's really all I wanted to show from this clip. All right, wrapping up here, that's all I really wanted to talk about for the most part. The only thing else I really kind of wanted to touch base on was the Indonesia hospital out here. So, if you didn't know, this hospital was primarily donated. A lot of the donations were from Indonesians, and so that's why it's called, the Indonesia hospital, although it is, of course, run in the Gaza Strip. So, when you hear about Indonesia hospital in Gaza and you're thinking like, how has this uh, branched out into Indonesia, a part of the world that's like, halfways away? It's not. It's just a hospital that has primarily, I believe, a lot of also Indonesian volunteers as well, but was primarily funded by Indonesians. But other than that, of course, I'll update you as this conflict continues and as major updates happen. I'll let you know. And other than that, thanks for watching.